Hey everyone, so today we're going to be discussing the Ford Transit differential. I've been asked a few times about the Ford Transit and the rear differential and its bearings. So we'll be referring to the Ford Transit which is a rear wheel drive with the 12 bolt cover. So I'll put up a picture now so you'll see that. The problem is a lot of people don't service these vehicles on a regular basis. When you don't change the oil on a regular basis on these Ford Transits, they use quite a heavy oil. So you'll see that now. The oil is quite thick, the viscosity. So what I found is when you don't service them on a regular basis, what happens is small metallic particles, so small fragments of metal, which is normal wear and tear from the bearings, from the pinion, from the ring gear of the differential, that all gets chewed up and it goes into the oil. So it breaks down and goes into the oil, and then that goes onto the bearing races. So here's an old bearing race I've got here. This is also from a Transit. So what happens is the bearing which sits in the race over here, so it's a tapered type roller bearing setup. So the bearings get pitted, and then it also creates micro scratches and grooves into the race. But the bearings are the main ones that start to get grooves and they start chipping away. So this is of the pinion, if I'm not mistaken, of a Ford Transit I've done. So if you actually look in here, it'll probably be a bit hard to pick up on camera, but there's scratches, I don't know if you can see that, and there's little dents and little grooves in it. So what this does, when this is riding in here under tension, I don't know if you can hear the little slight grinding noise. No doubt these are not, there's no oil, there's no lubrication. But just imagine that this noise, that grinding noise is what you hear now. So that gets amplified at speed. Because of the wear on the bearing, and due to that wear you hear a whining noise. And many times I've come across this where people have misdiagnosed it. They think it's something to do with the transmission, which it could also be the transmission if the transmission's not looked after. It could also be the hanger bearings for your drive shaft. That also could be a problem. But most of the time, if you go to the rear of the vehicle when it's been driven and you actually listen, so you go down low to the floor, you'll hear a high-pitched whining noise. That usually indicates that it is coming from the differential. It's normally easier if you have it on the hoist, and then there are special ways you can test it, but I understand that not everyone has that access. So if you take it for a drive and you pick up that the noise is coming from the rear axle, then chances are it's more than likely going to be the differential, the bearings that need to be done. And so that's what we're going to be discussing in the video today. So it's going to be a little bit of a different format. What I'll do is I'll run you through the Ford specifications. A little bit of caution I can give you is if you're not done this before, you're not set up preload, follow the steps in sequence that I'm going to show you now. From the Ford manual itself, from the service manual. You won't find this information elsewhere, like if you're looking at a DIY Haynes manual or something similar. They don't like you touching it, neither do dealerships, because most of the time they just want to sell you a rear axle. But if you do remove the bearings and replace them, it will run well as long as you set up the backlash and the preload properly. So that's something to keep in mind. That's very important. And you must use a new crush washer. You have to use new bearings with that as well, and a new nut as well for the pinion. That's very important. And you must also check the backlash of the ring gear, so the differential to the pinion. That's also something very important. The gear contact on the teeth, so from the pinion to the ring gear, that's very important. So just keep that in mind. I just thought I'd mention that before you continue on with the video, because that's quite important. So I mentioned the differential bearing noise and the whining, but there's also another symptom which you'll see in the next video clip coming up. So this is when there's actual excessive play in the differential, and I found this on the pinion side. So this is where you can check the backlash on the pinion by marking two white marks on it. You can actually move the differential forward and back just without disassembly. So when you rotate it, it should go to a certain point and stop, and when you rotate it back, it should go back to that point and stop. and you take the measurement in between. So watch this next video and then you'll understand what I'm talking about. So if you have excessive play here, or if there's lateral play, so if you've got play on the horizontal and vertical axis, if you've got play up and down or in and out of the pinion, then it's a major telltale sign that you have to open up the differential and you have to check why it's failed, so why it's lost its tension or its preload. So that's very important. So just keep that in mind. That's another reason why you would open up the differential. It's not only to just replace the bearings just for winding, it's also if you have excessive play, so that's even more important. If you do have excessive play, you must as soon as possible because it's quite dangerous. So we start by jacking up the rear of the vehicle because we have to remove the rear axles, so the half shafts from the rear differential. So we have to remove that, and we have to remove the rear differential cover, because if you're working on a dual wheel rear axle for transit, it's almost similar, but it's a little bit more work to a single wheel. But regardless, the half shafts have to come out of the vehicle. So I won't really be covering that. I'll be covering the preload. I'll be covering the differential side of things today. So just keep that in mind. You can refer to, if you got a Haynes manual or something similar, you can refer to that. If it's a dual wheel rear axle, you have to remove the bolts around the hub, pull that out, remove the bolts, and then the whole axle just slides out. If it's a single wheel, you have to remove the drums and then you pull out the axle from there. So that's not too difficult, so I won't go into detail on that. Now moving on, once you remove the rear differential cover, that will expose the ring gear and the pinion. So then the next step is we have to remove the bolts off the pinion from the drive shaft to the pinion. So you've got to remove that. And once you remove that, then you've got to remove the lock nut, which goes onto the pinion. It's done up to a high torque, so then you can remove the rear flange from the differential. Again, you'll need a puller as well for this. So once you remove the rear flange, then you can begin disassembly of the rear differential, so the crown wheel. So you can take that out. So how you take that out is now there's shims. So follow along with the diagrams going forward now. So you have to undo, there's a little locking tabs that hold on the shims. So these are adjustable type shims that go on the left and the right side. So this sets the backlash, is what I was talking about earlier on in the video. So once you remove the shims, just be careful because the whole ring gear, so the whole rear differential will fall out. So make sure you have a good hold on it because it is heavy, so just be careful. Once that comes out, then you can go ahead and remove the pinion. So the pinion will come out this way, so it'll come out towards the rear where you remove the cover of the differential. So it gets pushed out that way. You will have to tap it because it will be a little bit tight in there. So the hardest part of this job would be hitting out the inner races. So you need a long bar. You can use a brass bar if you're scared that you might damage the housing or anything. So you want a softer material and you just want to hit out the race, so the internal race. If you've done this before, then that's fine. You can go ahead and use some steel and tap that out. That's not a problem. So like I was saying, probably the hardest part would be to change out the bearings. On the differential, I found that sometimes you can cut the bearing, so you can cut the race off the ring gear itself, off the differential. That's sometimes the easiest way. Sometimes if you're lucky enough with the tool, you can actually extract it. And when you're reinstalling the new race, if you want it, you can put the rear differential in a cool area so that it drops the temperature of it, and then you can heat up the bearing, so then it slides on a lot easier. So that's another tip I can give you. I won't go into too much depth. I will cover this in a future video when I actually do one on a vehicle. So I'll let you continue on with the video and the slides. But the key here is to use something like bearing blue or any other dye, or just if you look up bearing blue, you'll find it. It's basically to get the gear. So once you replace the bearings on both the pinion and on the ring gear, on the differential, you can go ahead and reinstall it with the new races. Once you install it, like I was saying, follow this diagram now. The gear tooth pattern, this is very important. So make sure you get this set up correctly, and make sure you get the pinion load, so the preload on the pinion set up correctly as well with your dial torque indicator. So that's quite important. So I'll put up another picture now so you can see what that is, or just refer back to the initial start of the slides of the Ford service site. So those are two key important things. Once you get the gear tooth pattern looking like what you see now, then you can go ahead and put the locking tabs back in to lock the shims in place. Remember, it doesn't need too much force. You want it so that there's a tiny bit of free play, because when it expands, then it will take up that free play. So just keep that in mind. That's quite important. And then you can go ahead and close it. Like I said, this is a brief video I've covered. It's just mainly to give you the specs and what the Ford manual says and my thoughts on it, having done a few of these before in the past. So stay tuned and subscribe to the channel. There will be a lot more interesting content coming out. A lot more Ford Transit videos and Mercedes Sprinters and a lot of other interesting videos. So stay tuned and subscribe and do like the video so that more people can view this video, and hopefully it'll help a lot more people out around the world. So thanks for watching, everyone. Do like and subscribe. These are the tools you require in addition to your basic tools. And now we can see this is the genuine parts list from Ford. So this is for all the parts that you need to do this job from Ford. These are the diagrams. So that shows the flange and the seal on the pinion. This shows the pinion bearing and the crush collar. And over here we've got the bearings for the left and right side of the differential. So now we begin with the process from the service manual. This is the factory service manual from Ford. So I've rearranged it to follow the method in a logical pattern, because even in the ETIS it varies between different modules. So I've tried my best to rearrange it. Like I said, there's a few specialist tools. Otherwise, you can follow my tools required chart that I just showed you earlier. And just refer back to the OEM genuine parts if you need to. And towards the end of this video, I'll put up the pictures of the aftermarket bearings. Also genuine high quality bearings, but in case you struggle to get the Ford equivalent, because they do become obsolete over time, have a look at the end of the video. That will have all the bearings that I bought. So the aftermarket bearings that I got for the vehicle were the Timken bearings. Good quality bearings, and I've not had a problem with them. On our test vehicle, we had done over 40,000 kilometers with these bearings and just service the differential regularly, and not a single problem. It runs smoothly and it runs well. Make sure these vehicles are serviced on a regular basis and you won't have a problem with them. Thanks for watching, everyone. See ya.